All right. So again, if you're just joining, feel free to put your name and where you're from in the chat and an important environmental topic for you. I'll actually read some of these off. Let's see. William Walter, Germantown, clean water. I agree there. Dylan Madison, wildlife conservation. Dylan. Amy Mueller, Waukesha County Wildlife. Barbara With, Madeline Island, water. Water is a hot topic, I see. Appleton, or Otters, Appleton, line 5. Sam Laude, Fox Lake, sustainable AG practices. Very, very important. Peggy McDowell, Tomahawk, environmental preservation. Very, very important. Gene Voss, Stoughton, Wisconsin, Conservation Congress, clean water. Two very, very important two things. Jackson from Columbus, clean air. Most definitely. Emma Fleece, hey Emma. Milwaukee, clean water. Sheila Mitchell, Ashland, clean air and water. Most definitely. That makes 100% sense to me, considering we cannot live on this earth without air and water. So I'm glad that most of us are in agreement on that one. So it's 6:04. We're going to continue to let people in as we go, but I want us to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to pass it off to our social media organizer, Eric Roholm, and he's going to get us into some announcements.
Yes, thank you so much. So I just wanted to start off by grounding us in saying that April 4th was a great day for progressives in Wisconsin. So that was our election day for our nonpartisan and also our Supreme Court race just a couple weeks back. 7 of our 10 candidates won their elections in Madison, in Milwaukee, and in Outagamie County, which is super, super exciting. Tuesday, Wisconsin proved that we are serious about winning a progressive future, which is really, really, really exciting to see. So congratulations to these folks, John Duncan, Alder Yannette Figueroa Cole, MGR, Govindarajan. We made a lot of calls for Juliana Bennett as well. We made a lot of calls for, as well as Missy Zombor, who defeated a school privatization candidate in Milwaukee. Tom Nelson for winning re-election resoundingly in Outagamie County, and Alder Nikki Conklin as well. It was a super, super, super exciting day on Tuesday. And one of the biggest reasons that it was so exciting was that we did flip our Supreme Court on April 4th. So round of applause for the state of Wisconsin. Janet Protasiewicz will join 3 other women to form the first progressive majority on Wisconsin Supreme Court in a long, long time. I personally would argue that it has been longer than 15 years since we last had a progressive majority on the court. And we cannot overstate, I cannot possibly overstate the importance of how important it was that we defeated Dan Kelly. So now that we have a chance to end one-party Republican rule with fair maps, we're giving Wisconsinites the chance to elect a real progressive majority down the line. So great things could be on the horizon for our state now, whether that's repealing Act 10 to raising the minimum wage, and of course, green energy and protecting our natural resources, which is the topic of our meeting today. So on that note of exciting news and great new possibilities for our state, I am going to pass it back to our executive director, Andre Walton.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And yeah, it's really exciting. I know we all worked really hard for that Supreme Court race, and it's always a coin flip on what's going to happen on statewide elections in Wisconsin, but luckily it went in our favor. And I think, for progressives, we needed this win because we've had so many losses over the last 10 years that we started to begin to think loss, and we were just getting too used to losses. So it's really nice to get a win. And I think this is the start of a new beginning here in Wisconsin. So looking forward to continuing to work on progressive issues here in Wisconsin, and in particular, definitely environmental issues. But before we get started, I'm gonna say a few words and then we'll go ahead and get into our discussion. So in 1970, the idea of Earth Day was formed by Wisconsin's very own Gaylord Nelson and a group of passionate activists because they knew a deteriorating environment would only lead to an outcome that would be unfavorable to future generations. Yet 53 years later, corporations continue to invest in pipelines that transport dirty tar sands, our water quality continues to be degraded, and our wildlife is being pushed to near extinction. I think it's safe to say that our state has been sold to the highest bidder at the expense of future generations. While our current situation seems grim, we have not lost the battle for climate justice just yet. In fact, the battle is just beginning. We have dedicated activists all around the state fighting to reform what is left of the Wisconsin Conservation Congress and slowly but surely making change. We have activists continuing to stand against Enbridge and its endless crusade to build the Line 5 pipeline. And we have youth standing up and expressing their concern of the approval of the Willow project that was greenlit by the Biden administration. All across this state and country, people are making their voices heard. But we're not just here to speak, we're also here to take action. So by the end of this discussion, I want you to all get involved and make an impact. Our Wisconsin Revolution's Environmental Committee is fighting for environmental justice in Wisconsin, and we need help from people like you. So sign up at the end at ourwisconsinrev.com and join the Environmental Committee today. So we're going to start off with a discussion, and at the end of each discussion segment, we'll have the opportunity to ask the panelists any questions as the audience may have. So if you do have questions as we go on into this discussion, please drop them in the chat. So our first speaker is Amy Mueller. Amy is a member of our Wisconsin Revolution's Environmental Committee, and she's currently serves on the Sierras Club Wisconsin Chapter Executive Committee, Wildlife Team, and Equity Committee. She also represents the Wisconsin chapter of National Sierra Club Council of Club Leaders, functioning as liaison with the national organization. Throughout the year, she also focuses on Wisconsin Conservation Congress efforts and will share knowledge about this unique statutory group today. So thank you for joining us today, Amy. How you doing?
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks for having the focus this week of Earth Week, and sort of Earth Month focus. So thank you for having me. Through the miracle of technology, what I'm going to do is just try to bring up a quick slide presentation, and it more so to keep myself on target. But what I'm going to do tonight is try to provide a little bit of context. Like you mentioned, my background is with the Sierra Club, and that's the main group that I focus in. An important disclaimer to start with is that I'm not a member of the Wisconsin Conservation Congress. So the good and kind of the fun part about that is I can keep it real, and I'm giving you my opinions. These are, what I've observed, and I think what, many folks have noticed along the way. So I'm a concerned citizen. I live in Western Waukesha County. It's sort of rural here. If you've ever been to Lapham Peak State Park, you've only been a few minutes from my house. I live off the Ice Age Trail, and I love getting outside, and wildlife reform is important to me. And when we had that crazy, absolutely egregious wolf hunt in 2021, I wrote a resolution for the Wisconsin Conservation Congress about banning hunting wolves with hounds, because that was really kind of one of the most, scary things that really took place during that hunt. And so it brought me to the Wisconsin Conservation Congress, and I will do my best to explain what I've learned in the last few years in a few minutes. The first thing I learned is that they're really unique to Wisconsin. Good or bad, it's unique. And it's a statutory group. So it was initially started in the 1930s with a name most of us would recognize, Aldo Leopold, among others. And it was actually written into code and recognized as a formal liaison to the Board of Natural Resources in 1970. So this gives you the actual code. So sometimes, it's, well, what is this group? Do we need it? How formal is it? It's pretty formal. It's in our code. So it kind of gives you the context on the screen there. I won't read it, but the important thing is that it is reporting to our Natural Resource Board. So if you've been following any of the news in our state around Fred Preen or anything like that, that board is who the Wisconsin Conservation Congress is set up to report to. And it's just advisory. So that's an important thing. Let's see here. I'll keep her moving, as they say. So the mission, this is an important one. This is taken from their website. It is meant to represent all Wisconsin natural resource users. So the challenge with the Wisconsin Conservation Congress, as it is today, is that I don't think anyone could dispute that it's disproportionately hunters, trappers, and anglers. And as you can see in the logo even, you can see why that might be, right? That kind of gives you their target market right there. So I think that's kind of the challenge with the Wisconsin Conservation Congress. But I will say, in my observations, I've also come across a lot of really moderate, really ethical people involved in the Congress as well. So I don't want to say that it's all, disproportionately representative, but it's got pockets of people where we'd like to see some progressive change. Now, the structure of the Wisconsin Conservation Congress is sort of interesting. It is broken up. Ultimately, every county that you're in, like I gave my example, I live in Waukesha. Every county in the state has 5 delegates. So 5 people are elected into the Wisconsin Conservation Congress. And it's on kind of a rotation. So every year, or there's either one or more delegates up for election in your county. And there are, you do the math, 5 times 72 counties, there's 360 total delegates. And then they have a map, as you can see on the right, that sort of breaks it into 11 districts. Those districts aren't without controversy as well. We kind of joke that this was kind of the original gerrymandered map of Wisconsin, because it really is difficult to get progressive leadership into this group, because every district that you see there out of the 11 is responsible for electing 2 members to their district leadership council. And that district leadership council carries a lot of authority. They're the group that is able to make the final decision on what resolutions go to the spring hearing. We'll talk about that. They also can change their code of procedure book. So that's a big one, and that's been a big factor in the last couple of years. So getting people onto this district leadership council is a big deal. In my opinion, that's where I think we have maybe the biggest uphill battle. There's a lot of kind of bad actors on that district leadership council that eventually I'm hoping one day will be voted off. So that's the kind of just the basic structure. So 5 people from every county, and then they elect 2 people from every district to the district leadership. Then there's also advisory councils. So if you were one of those 360 delegates, you can request to be added to any of these advisory committees that you see there on the screen. And you may or may not get put on there, depending if your district leader wants to put you on there. They may have someone that's been in there that there's no term limits right now, which is a whole nother conversation. But some of these committees are very friendly. The environmental committee is very well run, very, I think, very open to discussion and really tackling some important issues. And there's a few others. And then there's a few others, and I'll throw out there, I don't think there's any question, like things like the Bear Committee or the Fur Harvest Committee are maybe some of the more difficult, biased, sort of, you got some pretty fringe interest groups running those committees. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but if you are, there's a whole variety. I know tonight, a lot of the folks mentioned water was important. They do have, that would probably fall under like the environmental committee. There's the Great Lakes committee, which is a good one as well. And then legislative, a lot of our changes in Wisconsin would require legislative changes. Anything that would be coded or even, one day need a legislative approval would go through that committee. So it's kind of some committees to kind of give you an idea of things and areas they talk about. I won't cover all of them, but just so you have an idea. And then this is really a critical piece that I don't want to skip over. Why is the Wisconsin Conservation Congress so important? Why are we talking about it tonight? It is just advisory to the Natural Resource Board, but they have this annual survey, and that survey, those results are published, And the Department of Natural Resources looks at that. Of course, the Natural Resource Board has to look at that. But a lot of our lawmakers look at that because it's very easy for them to look at, okay, where are my counties, or where is my district, and what are they thinking? How did they vote? And oftentimes, even lawmakers will vote one way or another based on what they can point to with the Wisconsin Conservation Congress. So it is kind of a big deal. It's got a larger influence than one might think. So I like that. So that's why it's important to kind of keep a pulse on this group. And then beyond that, they also kind of get these guaranteed spots on DNR committees. And I'll give you a close example. The recent Wolf Management Plan Committee was split kind of down the middle. They kind of had advocate groups on one side, and then they had your more traditional hunter-trapper groups on the other. Well, the Wisconsin Conservation Congress didn't get put with the hunter-trappers. They had a statutory spot. Well, of course, that swung it so that the traditional hunter-trapper voice was the majority. So it's important to think about how the WCC does affect our natural resource policy. And those are two really big examples. So that's why it's important that as a Wisconsinite, you be at least aware of this group. One of the things that Andre sort of asked me was sort of give you the current state. And I would say it's a transitional group. Like I mentioned, that large group, that authoritative group at the top, their leadership, their district leadership council, I would describe as somewhat hijacked by the Wisconsin Bear Hunters Association Incorporated. I think they tend to be a little bit more desperate to hang on to and protect those fringe rights that they have here in our state. They tend to be wanting to sort of squash the voice of the opposition, and they've made some pretty aggressive changes in the last few months doing so. And more often than not, I would describe it as acting a little bit more like a private hunting group rather than a public, statutory group. So, that's the kind of the challenge, right? Is getting some larger, some diverse thinkers in that group. But I would say there is a minority and an emerging minority group there that is more diverse and is focused on getting all users' voices heard. And I think we just need more of that. So that's, talking about action with this group. And I know this group is ready to jump in. This is where, we can have an impact. So can it be reformed? I'm going to say optimistically, yes, but we need two things. We need more people getting involved who care, that are aware, that are participating in whatever capacity possible. And then I think it's going to take a couple of years, right, to get people elected, to get people involved, understanding the system. And the challenge, and one of the questions I get asked a lot, and I've had to dig through myself, is the WCC sort of runs itself based on how it's statutorily set up. The DNR does not call the shots. They are not oversight. The Natural Resource Board does not make changes, or in no way can they, say, oh, we didn't like that you did that, WCC, you've got to change it. They have their own executive committee and they can make their own rules. So as long as they're following basic Wisconsin laws, it's kind of hard to hold their feet to the fire to just do the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing sometimes, which can be a challenge. So that's where getting the right people, getting more like-minded folks, people caring about the environment long-term, is going to be really critical. How can we get more involved? Well, maybe, and I hope this isn't the first time you're hearing about it, but you might be, but they have a spring hearing, and that's really transitioned to an online survey. It used to be just in person. It's held every April. The statewide results were just posted, so I have just a little bit on that. But next year, it would be wonderful if you consider submitting a resolution. They now take that a little bit earlier. So if you're thinking about writing a resolution for change in February, that's a great time to start thinking about that. And then furthermore, just taking the survey is important, right? Give your input. This is your opportunity to have a voice. So it's important that the environmental, people of the state start to come out and weigh in on these things. And just real quick, just because this is so top of mind, because it just was posted like about 2 days ago, I think what's cool is that the vast majority of the statewide questions that I was hoping would be supported were. So I know this group was very involved with the biosolids question, having the reinstate the prove it first mining law is important. Huge shout out to Dylan, who's on here for the restricting lead and fishing tackle was widely supported, trying to get more public education out there for really what lead does to all of our birds of prey, especially bald eagles was supported. So we had a lot of really good things come out and be supported on their recent survey. So again, that signals that I think we're starting to get some momentum with people getting involved. The only thing that was kind of a bummer coming out of the survey here just this week was we still have some education to do around the super eco builder of beavers. So for my beaver believers out there, I think it was just a tough year for this because a lot of the fishing questions, the DNR does fishing questions alongside the WCC questions. And this was the year they asked all their fishing questions. And I think anglers still hold on to this belief that beavers and trout can't coexist. So we have some work to do, but lo and behold, I think this is something where as we start to get more involved and people start to get, participating in those things, we're going to start to see questions and really more powerful questions being asked on that survey. Beyond that, if you're just getting involved now, what I would ask you to do is, if you can, keep an eye on this group. A lot of their meetings now are on Zoom, thankfully. And that's kind of where I've learned, started to understand how this works. So it makes it easy. You can just listen to it. And, August through December is when they have those advisory committee meetings. So that's a nice opportunity. And then you can always reach out to your local delegates, right? Everybody should have 5 delegates that you can always reach out to with questions or concerns in your county. So that's another really good thing. And then lastly, I'm going to plug this, even though we just had elections in the first week of April, I still think it's super good. I think this is how we really start to reform it and kind of right the ship, is just by getting, a diverse group of people into the Wisconsin Conservation Congress. So hoping to shift that dynamic slowly but surely. So I went through the Wisconsin Conservation Congress and the very complex system in a few minutes. I'll pause there and just see what questions you might have. Again, very short, but at least gives some detail.
Yeah, it looks like we have a question from Patricia. She said, what happened with the banning with hunting wolves with dogs that passed in 2013?
Okay, so that was a question that ultimately went to the state level last year. It did not get supported across the state, unfortunately. So still have some work to do. That's still a very, very controversial thing in our state. So we will stay on that, Patricia.
And I'm not sure if this is a question by Peggy, but it kind of looks like one. That she says, she's always wondered how the silent sports could be represented by the DNR and the WCC, such as hiking, bird watching, bicycling, boating, etc. If you feel free to comment on that one.
Yeah, I think that's really the community that, I'm trying to get involved here. So that's where I think if we want to have a little bit more influence, if we want to start to have, a voice in these meetings, I think getting involved with the WCC is one way. Again, another way is just, following up with the DNR and working with your legislators. But this is one way too. And I think this Wisconsin Conservation Congress has been traditionally a home for hunters, trappers, and anglers. But that's not what it was set up for. It really is set up for all users, including people that enjoy the more silent sports. So I think this is just we're starting to get more, and I just encourage that shift to continue.
Awesome. I have one last question, the one I was curious about. Do you think that because of the Supreme Court election and the potential of, fair maps that may pass in the near future, do you think that would have any effect on a more balanced legislator? Would it have any effect on the WCC?
Yeah, I've thought about that for the WCC, and I think not directly. I don't think there's going to be legal action brought to the court. I think that's going to be, to get to that court for actual opinion. But it may be indirectly. And I think with a lot of things, it'll be interesting to see how party dynamics shift, right? Because obviously a message has been sent, so I'm curious to see if that means there's going to be a more desperate cling, right, to safeguard policy that we have in our state. I don't know. It'll be interesting. I do think there could be environmental law that goes before the court that could shift things, but directly with the WCC, I don't see it, at least in the near future, from my perspective.
Yeah, appreciate you giving me that opinion. I think that was all the questions that I've seen in the chat. Is there anything else you would like to share before we move on to our next segment?
Oh, no, I would just appreciate everybody's time. And if you have any questions regarding the Wisconsin Conservation Congress, Andre knows how to get a hold of me. I'm happy to help. It's taken a couple of years to sort of get to understand it. And certainly if you have any questions about it or involvement, please let me know.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. I would consider Amy our encyclopedia for the WCC. So definitely a good resource if you have any further questions down the line. So really appreciate it, Amy. We're so grateful for your knowledge and you coming on and share the information with us. And now I am going to pass it to William Walter, and he's going to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Andre. So our second speaker of the evening, Barbara With. Barbara has been a water protector since 2011 when she was part of the HELP camp, HELP standing for Harvest Education Learning Project. And this was in northern Wisconsin, set up to stop GTAC from opening a 22-mile open pit mountaintop removal iron ore mine on the shores of Lake Superior. She's joining us tonight to talk about the fight against pipelines, which, as Wisconsin residents, particularly the Midwest and the northern Midwest, this is something that is very near and dear to a lot of our hearts. Barbara, thank you so much for joining us tonight. You have the floor. You're muted, Barbara.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Yes, I live in Lake Superior. I live on Madeline Island, Moonawanna-Connick Minis. And right now, we are not just dealing with pipelines. We are dealing with a very specific pipeline, Enbridge Line 5. And to understand Enbridge Line 5 and how pivotal a point it is right now in pipelines, you kind of have to understand the whole Enbridge pipeline that it attaches to. Because what Enbridge likes to do is they like to break it up into little bitty segments and not have the kind of regulation that one big long pipeline would have, and make you think it's just these short versions of it, but it's not. So we start up in the Alberta tar sands, and I don't have any visuals, but my hands. So you start up at the Alberta tar sands, and it comes down Canada, and it enters, and it's I think it's 3 up there. That enters into northern Minnesota, that they, in 2001, they pushed line 3 through northern Minnesota. And even to this day, the damage is still being done, which is a whole nother story, but we have a lot of documentation on that. It goes into Superior, where it goes into the Husky refinery, and the tar sands then gets processed, and it goes out into line 5, and line 5 shoots across northern Wisconsin. And if you're familiar with northern Wisconsin, or not, if you're not familiar with northern Wisconsin, there's some of the most world-class watershed on the shores of Lake Superior, right outside of Ashland, the Bad River Indian Reservation, the Pinocchi Hills. These are just hundreds of acres of some of the most amazing water, but also some of the most rugged million-year-old landscapes that there are. And this pipeline has been there for 70 odd years. It's been operating illegally since 2013. Bad River sued them to get it out of their reservation in 2019. And they just recently won that, where it was determined that Enbridge has indeed been trespassing. And they were sent off to negotiate some kind of settlement because Enbridge, because they have been enriching themselves while they've been trespassing, they're going to owe Bad River. And I believe, don't quote me on this one, but I believe the whole settlement goes over to Line 5 Michigan as well. But the big problem and the big concern that we all have right now is not the money. It's the fact that they won't shut down the line. And right now, we just had a huge storm. I'm not home right now. I'm in Madison right now, but we just had over a foot of snow on top of the snowiest winter that's ever been recorded on Madeline Island, at least since 1939. And so what we get is flooding. So we're just at the beginning of our flooding stage, and there's just some very, very precarious old decrepit pipelines in the way of some of this flooding that's coming down. So it's really much more kind of a much more urgent situation for us. We've been watching this meander that's in the Bad River where the pipeline goes through, and it's starting to now, after all these years of monitoring it, it's starting to break through. So we're really concerned about that. I'll get to a little bit of that at the end about what we can do about that. But anyway, Line 5 goes on, and it hugs the UP, and it goes underneath the Straits of Mackinac. It splits into two lines, and it goes underneath the straits, not at all. Also 70 years old. It's not supported. It too is in somewhat precarious, what I think is an emergency situation. And Governor Whitmer of Michigan in 2020 ruled that they were not abiding by the laws that they agreed to and evicted them. And in May 2021, they were supposed to shut down. And so now they're operating illegally under the Straits of Mackinac and trying to propose this tunnel that they want to build under the straits to put the pipeline in. So the pipeline continues on then through Michigan, and it leaves the United States at Sarnia. It goes back into Canada, and it goes up Canada up through Montreal as Line 9, and it jumps back over across the United States to Portland, Maine, where most of it's shipped out. So all of this line is a shortcut. We don't benefit from this oil. It's because they don't want to run it through their land. So this situation up north, I'm trying to think of some really practical next steps. I would love if Communities United by Water.org, Communities United by Water. This is our major website. I built it last year, and it's the repository for everything about water around the Great Lakes there. We've got a couple actions going right now. One is we have a letter that we're getting signatures on that is going to the Canadian ministers, including Prime Minister Trudeau and other environmental ministers up in Ottawa, because Canada is using it's called the 1977 treaty, which is basically a treaty between Canada and the United States that says something to the effect of because we all know that pipeline transport of oil is very safe, there is really nothing that you can do to interrupt the flow of this oil between the United States and Canada. Now, we all know the 1977 treaty is somewhat laughable in the face of the 500 other treaties that exist between the indigenous people and both sets of government. So we're doing a letter that we're going to deliver up to the ministers. We're not exactly sure when, but it'll be sometime in the next month or so. So if you go to Communities United by Water, at the top, there's a say no to 1977 treaty. If you pull that out, sign that, pass it around to the people that you know or organizations that you know that can support us when we go up to do that. And also, if you sign up on Communities United by Water, there's also the events. We do a lot of events, and we have a lot of events coming up this year. We've got events on Madeline Island in July 7th and 8th, the Red Man's Market going on, and an indigenous music festival. We also have a Line 5 coalition, which is what I want to say about the work that's been done in Wisconsin since 2011, when I became a water protector, because Scott Walker was elected and they wanted to put in this outrageous mine. And that's when I got to know my indigenous neighbors, and we brought the South and the North together. So we have this wonderful coalition right now that warms my heart, that there's hundreds of people in it. We have committees. We meet once a month. We strategize. We have a media committee if you want to work on that. We've got some regulatory committee. We've got local organizing committees. So if you want to be a part of it, we're a really fun group, and considering, so you can go to Communities United by Water and shoot us an email or a contact and just tell us you're interested, and we'll bring you in. And so that's kind of where we're at with it. There's a lot of general things I could tell you to do, boycott those banks, divest of those things, but education is really the most powerful thing, I think, because some people don't even know there's the Pinocchio Hills. They don't even know there's this water body up there. So educate yourselves. We have everything on Communities United by Water, all the latest news and everything you want to know. And if not, you can always reach out and ask us. But we're working away day after day. And tomorrow night we have a Zoom. It's a kind of an emergency Enbridge Line 5 update and cross-border organizing. So if you want to come join us tomorrow night, that's also, you can sign up on Communities United by Water and do some networking. We've got people coming in from Canada. Everybody from all the parts of the front line are going to come and update what's going on. David Joe Bates, our drone operator, has some of that harrowing footage we're watching as the waters melt and start to flood down through this pipeline. And so you can come, it's at 6:00 Central tomorrow. Come and join us there and catch up on everything we're doing, and we'll be glad to see you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Barbara. Does anybody have any questions? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So if we don't have any questions, Barbara, I have some data that will, I think, help contextualize some of the stuff you said, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on some of these issues. Obviously, I could sit around and say, what should we do going forward? But I think you covered that nicely. So when we discuss the history of failure, particularly in regards to Enbridge, I think the Line 6B, which is considered the sister pipeline to Line 5, has to come up first and foremost. It ruptured in July of 2010, which caused the largest inland oil spill in U.S. history when 800,000 gallons of tar sands poured into the Kalamazoo River. Enbridge themselves did not notice the rupture until an outside caller alerted them nearly 17 hours later. This disaster cost more than $1 billion to clean up. The National Transportation Safety Board noted in the accident report under the probable cause section that the rupture and prolonged release were made possible by pervasive organizational failures at Enbridge that included deficient integrity management procedures, inadequate training of control center personnel, and insufficient public awareness and education. So it's pretty clear that Enbridge has been negligible at best. what can we do to make the company understand that we are watching them, that we are holding them to a higher standard, more so than our elected officials, because it's pretty evident they don't seem to care?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I think the work that we've all been doing, for example, when Enbridge had to submit an environmental impact statement, a draft environmental impact statement, and the public had a certain period of time when they could comment. And so one thing we did was we just got out like crazy and got people to comment on it and taught people how to comment on it so that it's not just don't build the pipeline. It was like, here's a specific thing I'm concerned about, which made them have to look into it. And that is really helpful, I think, especially in Michigan. When we did this, they got something like 31,000 comments that pushed out their regulatory processes for another year and a half. Now, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I don't know. I know that if they're pushing out the construction of this tunnel while all of these comments are being processed, it's maybe a good thing. But then there's that pipeline under the straits for another year and a half sitting there. They're not going to turn it off. So I think that divesting financially, I think that making our voices heard in those ways where we can. But we're dealing with an oil cartel. We're dealing with a cartel. These are not people doing business in the United States and Canada. This is an oil cartel that lies and doesn't care. And when you're talking about Kalamazoo, up in the Pinocchio Hills, we've got million-year-old rock that people can't even get into, much less driving horizontal directional drilling through places where they're not even going to be able to access, even if they knew it was leaking. So I think education right now is the best that I can suggest, that everybody educate themselves on exactly what's going on up north in our state.
Excellent. And something I think you touched on too that's really worth noting. We talk about the financial incentivization of things like Line 5. A 2018 study by the London Economics International Organization titled Michigan Crude Oil Production Alternatives to Enbridge Line 5 for Transportation actually noted that alternative methods would cost around $1.31 more per barrel than using Line 5. The report concluded this cost increase would be lost in the noise of typical crude oil price volatility, meaning there are economically viable alternatives available that are much, much safer than risking the health of our waterways and ecosystems. So I think we can counter that message that you will hear from a lot of supporters of both Enbridge and the Line 5 pipeline, that, you know, we have to do it because gas prices are so cheap and it's really good for politicians and all that kind of stuff. Well, the data says otherwise. The data says that that price increase is negligible at best. So and that's even if you want to put a financial value on protecting our landscape and our pristine ecosystems that the state of Wisconsin has. So thank you so much for joining us, Barbara. That was incredibly informative, and we are very lucky to have experts like you able to come and speak with us in these type of.
Right, I see one more question in the chat. It says, what bank should we boycott / challenge? I think that's a fair question. Because there's a lot of banks out here bankrolling these oil
Patricia, do you know that one? I think Wells Fargo, Chase.
Chase is a big one. Bank of Montreal, BMO, provides a lot of funding for tar sands.
My suggestion is, if you can, get into a credit union. Credit unions have a lot more accountability to their customers.
Yeah, they don't generally invest in fossil fuels.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, thank you, Patricia and Barbara. Really appreciate that. And next, actually, before I go on, unfortunately, Madhvi, who was supposed to be joining us today, was unable to join us, but we still will be having a discussion about the Willow Project. So I'm going to pass it to Anders and Eric, and they're going to have a conversation about the Willow Project.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anders. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the electoral strategy organizer for OWR up in Appleton, Wisconsin. Unfortunately, as Andre said, Madhvi can't join us. But Eric and Eric is our social media organizer, are going to have a conversation about the Willow Project, which is a petroleum project that was just approved by the Biden administration, which could be completely catastrophic to our goal to decarbonize as a nation as quickly as possible, to try to not send us off a crazy tipping point. So Eric, thank you for, well, first of all, thank you for being well read on this topic and being able to discuss this.
It's my
Could you
job.
start off by just telling us a little bit about what the Willow Project is?
Yeah. So I guess real quickly, I just really want to thank Amy and Barbara for joining us. I had a different, actually non-Wisconsin, not Midwestern related fossil fuel disaster as the background of Barbara's slide there. And there's a reason for that, because you laid out the stakes very well, that these aren't just projects that we morally oppose and that aren't just going to cause climate change in a kind of vague context. These things are very real and pragmatic in the destruction that they cause in our communities in the very short term as well as the long term. So that is a very fair question to lead us into next. Anders, what is the Willow Project as we're talking about destruction? So I've got a map of the project basically up here. It shows you a little bit at the northern tip of Alaska. So I know I really like to ground conversations like this. I know a lot about the Biden administration's or orientation towards our platform overall, I guess I would say. So I like to ground discussions of anything that administration is doing in terms of the promises that they actually made. You know, going back to 2020, we did endorse Senator Bernie Sanders for the presidency, and there were a number of reasons for that, some of which were his environmental positions and his support for a Green New Deal and all the things that were encapsulated in that. This really represents a real deviance from that idea. And so there were a number of compromises that Senator Sanders and Joe Biden came to together in the summer of 2020. And one of the compromises that was really pivotal in turning out youth climate activists and youth organizers and young people in general for Joe Biden was his commitment that there would be no more drilling on federal lands. So to get back to your question, what is the Willow Project? I'm actually going to quote CNN here because I think they had a really nice snippet that got it really perfect. It is a ConocoPhillips project. That name might ring a bell if you've ever driven past gas stations. It is a ConocoPhillips project. It's a massive, decades-long, it's an oil drilling venture on Alaska's North Slope. And that is in the National Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is owned by the federal government. And so one of the reasons that this project is actually going through some of the logic that the Biden administration is using is, well, we don't necessarily love the project on its merits, but to be fair, they had a permit that was approved by the Trump administration in 2020. And this is part of a pattern that we've seen with the Biden administration over and over. Some of the negotiations they made, I guess, concessions, I should say, to the climate activists, progressive base of the party have been, there were originally going to be 5 drill pads and ultimately they reduced that down to 3. Still going to allow the company to drill about 90% of the oil they're pursuing. And overall, I do want to ground this, and this is kind of based on this myth, this idea that there's basically an infinite amount of fossil fuels under Alaska. And if we can just unlock that magical potential, we can achieve this really wonderful sounding term of energy independence, which on paper sounds really, really lovely. But what in practice that actually means drilling this project is continuing to further fossil fuel drilling, which ultimately sets us back from our ultimate goal. We know that burning fossil fuels is what is causing the climate crisis first and foremost, and we need to be moving forward in that direction, not backward. So what the Willow Project represents is going kind of halvesies on a project from the Trump administration in order to give in this case, ConocoPhillips, but one of the fossil fuel corporations, part of the cartel, to give them what they want. So did that kind of give a good overview of the project in the sense that you were asking?
Yes. So I guess one question that I have, or a problem that I think about a lot, is right now we're seeing rising gas prices in America.
Sure.
at the same time that we are expanding our oil production. To be clear, there have been more oil permits issued under 2.5 years of the Biden administration than there were in all 4 years of the Trump administration. So we are reaching new peaks in oil drilling projects and our supply of oil domestically. And you know, there's all this talk about the reason that oil prices are so high is because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So what does this indicate to you with this project about the market forces there? Because the oil companies say they have no choice but to raise the prices, right? But we're seeing here an unprecedented amount of federal land being given to them with these rich resources.
Right. So this strikes on two really important points, one of which Barbara actually hit on earlier. And that is that our fossil fuel economy is large and it is slow and it takes time. So just because this project is being put into place, we will not feel, this oil will not actually hit the market, quote unquote, for several years. And so this is not going to have an immediate impact on price like that. And so this was one of the impetuses that dishonest politicians use as they're talking about the need to put in fossil fuels. And these projects don't ultimately contribute to our day-to-day expenses on fossil fuels, which gets kind of to the second point. Putin's price hike was a really clever moniker to be able to use to both make a political point about Vladimir Putin and dissuade Americans' concerns about fossil fuels. But the reality here, and again, this is a point that we've hit home earlier, these fossil fuel corporations function like a cartel. And a huge part of the reason that Americans were experiencing gas price hikes last year, and a little bit they're going up again right now, is that these fossil fuel corporations do not play in a fair market. They rig the rules of the market. They were charging as much as they could in order to maximize their profits, knowing that they would not have blowback from the Biden administration. And in fact, this ultimately did come to sort of a pressure point in the end last fall. So this general idea overall that expanding new drilling is just a magical fix to our gas price issues and is going to be the magic grease, I guess, to use an expression in our gears to sort of make everything function better and make our economy that much more efficient. It's really a lie. In practice, what that looks like is pipelines, it looks like spills, it looks like destruction, it looks like burning fossil fuels, and ultimately it looks like the climate crisis that's unfolding right now. And as experts say, will continue to result in things from glacial melts to catastrophic changes in weather patterns, forest fires. We've already started to experience what those things are going to look like. So this represents not only a real anti-science view of the environment, but also represents a real betrayal of the coalition who helped elect him in the first place.
Yeah, well, and we've talked about this many times, but there is no such thing as a safe pipeline or a safe oil project. There's no such thing as an oil project like this that doesn't cause natural disaster, that doesn't go wrong, that doesn't displace people and ecosystems. I guess the last question is, how do we hold Biden accountable, Eric?
Yeah, wow, that's a really good question. So I'm actually going to take that question, if you're okay with it, and sputter it into our very next and last section here, because that is a fabulous
Please
wrap
do.
up into what do we do about all of these things. Many of our guests today have talked about lots of important ways that you can get involved. I'm getting involved with Communities United by Water. Barbara, you should definitely put that link in the chat here. Getting involved with the Wisconsin Conservation Congress. And both of these folks have done some amazing stuff with our environmental committee. We also helped get folks at that public comment period last February about Line 5, that one was in particular. Amy is a really valuable member of our committee, helping us with the Wisconsin Conservation Congress and such. So it is really imperative to have your knowledge and your wisdom and your values with us together so that we can do these incredible things. There is strength in numbers, and that is why we like to say when we organize, we win. So our next time our environmental committee is going to meet is going to be next Thursday. That's April 27th, and that is at 7:00 p.m. There is an RSVP link right at the top there. That's a short link. That is bit.ly/OWR climate. Please RSVP to that, even if you are interested and know that you will not be able to come, or if you don't think you'll be able to come, but maybe, because that means we'll have your information. We'll be able to contact you. And we'll also be able to, we'll know that you're interested in environmental issues, and we'll be able to get a hold of you all the important issues that are coming up. So definitely get involved with our environmental committee. And at the bottom, you'll see our social medias are there, because please not only follow us on social media, where you'll see our environmental committee events and our other committees as well, and the hard work that they do. But you can share our stuff with your friends as well. Make sure that, like Barbara said, making sure that they're educated, that they know what the stakes are, talking to our friends and our folks and our neighbors and friends, and the relationships that we build together are going to be what really, really help us in the political revolution, make really amazing things happen. So as a wonderful next step to sort of synthesize all the work we've been doing and bring together all the powerful and poignant things that everyone has said today, please, please, please do RSVP for this environmental committee meeting. We'd love to have you in our environmental committee. If you are not already, you're doing such amazing stuff, and the more of us that there are there to do it, the more amazing stuff that we can do. So thank you so much. And I'd love to pass it back to Andre for any last minute housekeeping stuff or any final thoughts.
Yeah, final thoughts. I want to thank our panelists for joining us on this Wednesday evening. We know you're all very, very busy, so taking the time out to help educate people on these very, very important topics is great for us. Also want to encourage everybody here, if you're not already a member, please become an OWR member. It really helps us continue to organize. That's how we keep on these great, amazing staff that we have here today, and how we continue to organize around the state. And if you become a member, something that we're doing, you get one of these cool OWRs t-shirts like I'm wearing. They come in black or white. So it's either $5 a month or $50 a year, whatever is best suitable for you. But definitely would encourage you to do that to help to keep this revolution going. With that being said, I want you to all have a good rest of your night. And thank you again for joining the Our Wisconsin Revolution Organized to Win meeting. Have a great night, everyone.